You can X out that box with the yellow, and then if you can scroll over to where it says view on your header, a little bit higher.
Yeah, this.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Above that, the word view that's above it, you'll see file, edit, view, help, hit
Oh,
view,
yes.
and then present.
Okay, we're good. How exciting. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So I just want to introduce to you Chaplain Holly Bonner, who is an award-winning mental health professional, professor, writer, and creator of the informative website Blind Motherhood. And she is a good colleague of Marcos and has established a site, Blind Motherhood, in 2012 after losing her vision and becoming legally blind. And Blind Motherhood's mission is to demonstrate members of the blind and visually impaired community that they can parent safely, independently, and effectively. So we're really pleased to have you here, Holly, with us for this presentation. And you can see all of the degrees and credentials there on the bottom. We could probably spend the next half hour discussing all of those, but I'm going to let the power of your presentation speak for itself.
Thank you very much. I am so excited to be here. I have been in quarantine now since March, and I have 2 little girls. My husband is downstairs watching them in remote school right now. He just recently retired from the New York City Police Department after 25 years as a detective, never had a sick day. And with everything going on with COVID and just a lot of the unrest that has been happening, he decided to leave, and he has gone from detective to now kindergarten cop as he sits downstairs and kind of oversees the children as they get their remote learning. So please keep him in prayer that my house is not destroyed by the time this presentation is over. But I am very, very grateful to be here. You know, it was funny for me listening to Marcos give his presentation, because I did have him as a CPE supervisor, and I can tell you that that transference and countertransference was repeatedly spoken about, and it really was to our benefit. My background really started out in the field of human services and eventually ended up becoming a social worker. And through my social work experience, I attended Columbia University and graduated in 2010. I can tell you that we had an entire course on transference and countertransference. It was something that they really wanted us to understand and encapsulate within our education. And kind of piggybacking off of that, you know, now we're in this whole other realm about equity and inclusion. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions that people have when they look at clergy, whether it's lay people or people that are ordained or chaplains, is that universally people believe that those of us who serve God in some way are ultimately always equitable and inclusive. And unfortunately, that's just not true. Because as we are created in his image, we are also humans. And what I really want to do today is kind of help you to understand some of the new terminology that is surrounding this whole equity and inclusion movement that's happening here in the United States, and also kind of broaden your perspective a little bit about how equity and inclusive practices impact both the people that we serve and ourselves personally. One of the things that I encourage people to do when I discuss issues such as these is I want you to think of a camera. You know, you can go and take a picture of a beautiful scenic spot, any place, you know, where you're currently living. And if you change the lens on that camera, you could either zoom in, zoom out, maybe add a filter to it, change the way it looks. Everybody, every single one of us as chaplains, as spiritual care providers, has a type of lens in which we view the world. And sometimes, if we're not careful, that lens gets stuck. and we don't know how to change it to let in a new perspective. And what I'm hoping is through this presentation that I help you to adjust your lens a little bit, to reflect the time that we're living in right now and what's currently happening in the United States. So I want to start with the basics, and really the basics is understanding what these buzzwords are. What is equity? What does that even mean? So by definition, equity is really promoting justice, impartiality, and fairness with all the processes and procedures and resources by making institutions or systems more equitable or fair, right? So let's look at this image that we have here, equality versus equity. So you'll see that there's three pictures, right? It's little boys, three of them, that are watching a baseball game. And in the first picture, you'll see that each of the little boys is standing on a box. So that's assumed that everyone's going to benefit from the same support. They're all being treated equally. They all have a box that's the same height to try to see the baseball game. But if you look, little guy, you can't really see what's happening kind of behind that fence. So in that second images, the individuals are given different supports, a different series of supports really, to make it possible for them to have equal access to the game. And they are being treated equitably. When we say equitably, we mean fairly. Equally is the same. There is a difference. So if you see this picture, the guy in the middle, he has one box, and that little guy that I pointed out in the first picture has two. So they can all see the game, but they're given different supports, so they're able to do that fairly. In the third image, all three can see the game without any supports or accommodations, because in this case, the inequity was addressed. The systemic barrier has been removed. So they removed that wood fence in that last picture, and they replaced it with a chain link fence. So now everybody can see the baseball game, and they don't need any additional supports. And when we talk about systemic change, especially with regard to equity and inclusion, this is a pictorial example of that, right? They removed the barrier that was infringing on the children's ability to see the game, and in doing so, they had created systemic change. Next slide, Peter. So we also want to know and understand what inclusion means and what inclusive practices are. So inclusion is an outcome to ensure that the diverse are actually and feel welcomed. You want to go where you are celebrated, not where you are tolerated. And when we talk about inclusion, we do mean, yes, in our houses of worship, in our congregational committees or organizations, but also to everybody that we encounter. We want to create an inclusive atmosphere. So all these people that we are inviting into our lives or inviting into our clerical duties have the ability to participate fully in the decision-making processes and in the development for opportunities within our organization or group. Next slide. And then what is diversity? It sounds like such a simple, elementary subject, right? You know, you see the image, you see the different people, different faces, different cultures, but it really is the presence of all of these that include so much more than just what's on the surface. We have to look at race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, ethnicity, nationality. The socioeconomic status is key, language, disability or lack of disability, religious commitment, political perspective, these populations that have been and remain underrepresented among practitioners in the field, or they've been marginalized by a broader society. Next slide. So another key aspect for understanding equity and inclusion is spiritual care providers must educate themselves on the isms, right? So isms are words, quite obviously, with the last three letters, ISM. But what do some of those words mean? We hear them, but are we really retaining what they mean? Next slide, Peter. And I've chosen some that are really becoming more, not so much popular, but more heard more often, you know, as we have these conversations, both socially and politically. So sexism, that's the universal condition of civilization, likely because men tend to be larger and have more upper body strength. This brings with it a greater average of capacity for violence, and violence is the language of despotism. You know, women are forced into kind of these subservient or restrictive roles. Sexism is something that we hear a lot, but do we hear it as much in chaplaincy? If you look primarily at the numbers of female chaplains to male chaplains, you will see that there are more men in this field. Is sexism a problem? Is that something that we encounter? It depends, quite frankly, on where you work and where you live geographically, but it is always there, and we have to be aware of it. Heterosexism is a subcategory of sexism, and that describes the pattern in which people are clearly have identified genders and are assumed that they want to have sexual relationships exclusively with members of the opposite gender. Others, people that don't have that preference, are usually punished with ridicule or restriction. Now, racism has been a very hot button issue in the last few months, and will probably progressively go on to be so. That's the social pattern in which people who are identified as members of one specific racial group are treated differently from members of another. Ageism. Ageism isn't something that we hear as often about in chaplaincy, but again, if you look at the numbers of people who are spiritual care providers in those demographics and people that are chaplains, there is a median age. And this is why we're having such a shortage of finding people that are maybe in a younger generation that are equally well trained. So ageism relates to the social patterns of people with a certain chronological age. And then we have classism, and that's where wealthy or influential people congregate with each other and they oppress those who are less wealthy and influential. Next slide, please. Cisgenderism. Cisgenderism is something that I am hearing more and more in New York City as I deal with more clients that are identifying as LGBTQ or transgender. And this is a social pattern in which people who do not identify with their assigned gender roles or do not clearly have an assigned gender role are forced to either choose one or suffer social consequences. Here in New York City, we have the law that you are allowed to change the gender on your birth certificate, depending on how you choose to identify. There is a lot of blowback from that for these individuals that are suffering, with kind of coming to terms with how they see their gender should be reflected on a piece of paper, and that is cisgenderism. Then we have colorism. Colorism often gets very confused with racism, and it's not. Colorism is a pattern in society where people look at the pigment of another person's skin, and based on the melanin in the skin, they may treat that person differently. You've seen people maybe have, that are biracial, that have two colored skin tones. They may be treated differently as someone who identifies as Black or African American. Ableism. Ableism is something that is very close to my heart as a disabled woman. I find that society consistently makes it difficult for people who are disabled. They believe that we need to be fixed or cured, and that is very often not the case or feelings of people who are disabled. So to a degree, it's a social pattern that has been very difficult to overcome for the disabled community as a whole. Sizeism. For those of you who are ladies here, and as well as some of the men maybe in the group, society likes a certain size. And if you don't fit that size perspective, then society will treat you differently. You're maybe considered unhealthy if, you're a little bit bigger boned than somebody else. You could be in the greatest physical condition possible. You look at these women who are Olympic rowers or who attend these Ivy League universities on these rowing teams. They are very, very muscular, big built women. And, they are in excellent physical condition, but they don't meet what society has kind of framed as what is attractive. And therefore they suffer from sizeism. Nativism is a social pattern in which people are born in any given country are treated differently. And colonialism is something similar, but it's a social pattern in which people who are born in any given country are treated differently from those who immigrate to us, usually to benefit a specific identifiable group of powerful immigrants. Next slide, please. So spiritual care providers really need to comprehend and understand the concept of privilege. Now, I'm sure all of you at some point in the past few months have heard the term white privilege, and consistently the reaction that we have seen from, I should say, a majority of white people, when they hear this, is that they believe that it does not exist. People say white privilege is not real. Because I grew up poor, I'm not privileged. Because I may have had to work hard for what I have had. Instead of taking the time to listen and learn about white privilege, the knee-jerk reaction is to deny that it even exists, and that the white privilege take the term white privilege as a personal attack instead of attempting to use their white privilege in a positive way. Next slide, Peter. So let's go back to white privilege for a second. Nobody is saying that if you are white and that you had to work for everything that you have had, or if you have had to struggle or maybe dealt with poverty or had to pay for your own education, that you did not have a hard life. What white privilege is saying is that because solely based on the color of your skin, your life has been made easier by society's framework. And that has been very difficult for people to understand. When I was in social work school, there was an article that we had to read. It was called Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. I'm sure many of you have heard or read the article. And if you see the image here, you see the carrying that knapsack of the backpack of privilege. You know, privilege really gives us a right or immunity granted. It's a benefit. It's a benefit given to some people and not others. And it's the advantage that wealthy and powerful people have over other people in society. It's a special advantage, immunity or permission, a right or benefit granted or enjoyed. The advantages and immunities are enjoyed by a small, usually powerful group or class, especially to the disadvantage of others, and the principle or condition of enjoying special rights or immunities. White privilege exists, and the sooner we understand that as chaplains, as spiritual care providers, the better practitioners we will be, because we have to constantly keep ourselves in check and realize that, yes, even though we may have had a difficult upbringing or have had or faced our own challenges in life, being white or even appearing white has had privileges for us in society. Next slide. So what do chaplains need to ask ourselves? We need to do a self-reflection or a self-evaluation. What does it mean for us individually to be privileged? Who tends to be marginalized? What does it mean to be marginalized? Ways that we tend to deny that privilege is occurring. What ways do we use to say that it doesn't exist? What happens when one group is privileged over another? And how can we take action to interrupt these cycles of oppression or inequality? These are questions that we need to consistently ask ourselves as chaplains to ensure that we are not imparting anything negative on those we serve, on those we minister to. Next. If we choose or refuse to acknowledge privilege, then what are we promoting? Oppression. And here's a great quote from scripture in Jeremiah 22:3. This is what the Lord says: do what is just and right. Rescue from the hand of the oppressor the one who has been robbed. Do no wrong or violence to the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place. Even in the Bible, we hear about oppression. We hear that God does not want us to let this go forward. So what can we do in the here and now to change that? How can we alter it? Next slide, please. We have to first understand what oppression is. And oppression is the cruel or unjust exercise of power. Minorities were historically subject to oppression by those in power, and unfortunately, oppression still exists. So I'm not going to go through all the areas that society feels or examples of how society has offered ways for oppression to be sustained, right? But we need to know and we need to understand that people of certain races are denied opportunities and equality. And, you know, there are different people who believe different religious beliefs than ourselves, and they have been oppressed. Many of us have experienced oppression in our own right, whether we are white or any other color. What we need to make sure of is that we are understanding deep within ourselves what we know about oppression and applying ways to mitigate it as best we can to those that we care for or minister to. Next slide, please. So this is a kind of a flow chart about oppression in chaplaincy. And you may have seen these types of charts for other topics, but I think people most get confused in the first bubble up towards the top on the left where it says early years, right? Much of how we feel about oppression, right, is based on our value system. And when I say early years, I don't mean early years in our childhood. I mean early years in our career, right? Misinformation, missing history, bias history, stereotypes. If we begin our careers as spiritual care providers or as ministers in any capacity by having the wrong information, that's going to follow us throughout our career. So then we start to become socialized. We start to interact, with other people, both personally and professionally, and we begin to kind of have our ideas about equality, equity, inclusion, oppression. These all start to be formed in our head. And the cycle can be reinforced by stereotypes, omissions, distortions, people that we meet in our families, our schools, the media. This can all affect how chaplaincy and oppression can continue to go on the wrong path if we don't start educating ourselves to the latter. We begin to internalize these negative or these wrong messages. And then when it gets to colluding means that we are both dealing with both people that are the oppressed and people that we know that are oppressors. So the oppressed are those that are feeling oppression firsthand, and the oppressors are those that are doing the oppression. And based on how we react to those different types of relationships, we can break the pattern of oppression in chaplaincy and in our careers by educating ourselves and choosing to go a different route, or we can continue the cycle of oppression. So what I'm saying is if we don't change that lens that I spoke about in the introduction to this PowerPoint, if we want to stay with the same lens just because it's more comfortable or because it feels safe for us, we are never going to be able to fully dismantle oppression with our clients or those we chaplain to. Next slide. Oh, I think you got to hit back on the PowerPoint, Peter, at the top. The yellow box. There we go. Thank you. So how do we link these buzzwords, these isms, and privilege together while mitigating oppression in spiritual care? We need to all start engaging in social justice. Next slide. And social justice is something that is really at the peak of everything right now, right? Social justice is the practice of promoting and protecting human rights and responsibilities with an emphasis on economic and social rights of society's most vulnerable. So key themes in social justice: making the world a better place, equity of opportunity, equality of treatment, fairness, approaching differences, giving voice, power dynamics, asking questions, empathy through multiple perspectives. Now is the time. Now is the time. Next slide, please. And the key elements of social justice are multiple perspectives, examining root causes, empowering the disenfranchised, and the goal is to change the system. We have to connect to individuals' lives, individual ownership and leadership. There is a quote on this page: "No one is born fully formed. It is through self-experience in the world that we become what we are." And that's by Paulo Freire, who wrote the book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And his work really focused on the oppression and the inequity in educational systems, and how children not having the right education would follow them, through the lifespan, and how we need to stop that. Next slide, please. So why should chaplains embrace social justice now? And how do we handle the hot button issues? Because let's face it, right? It would be easier if we just kind of stuck to our old routine and keep doing what we've been doing, because it may be working for us. But why do we need to consider enacting ourselves in different social justice campaigns now? Next slide. It's because we are in the perfect storm. This is the perfect storm for 2020. I'll tell you, I live next to a cemetery in Staten Island. I am literally right adjacent to a Catholic cemetery. And I joke with my children because there is going to be a full moon on Halloween, and they're very excited about Halloween. And I said to them, I would not be surprised if zombies start popping up out of this cemetery and walk towards the house. This has been the year that nothing surprises me. And why is that? Look what is happening in our world. COVID, the fear, the stress, the physical and emotional stress, the economic suffering. Restaurants here are dying. People are out of work. Healthcare disparities. You look at the COVID cases and you look who's being treated and how many deaths were in different areas of New York City and New York State. I mean, has been a wake-up call about the oppression just in our healthcare system. The protests and the debates about systemic racism, the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Black Lives Matter, calls to defund the police. I mean, it has been a difficult year. How do we process these things? What can we do? How can we find a spot to make a change, right? Any change, the smallest change. How do we become a part of that? That is something that we as chaplains need to do for ourselves, for our ministry, and in service to God. I truly believe that. And finally, the election year. People have been calling our compassion line with the New York State Chaplain Task Force just from stress about this election. We are in such political unrest, and a majority of the ministry and the chaplaincy that I do works with nursing homes, and these seniors are beside themselves. Not only are they at a high risk for COVID, especially living in nursing homes down here in New York City, but they are really afraid of what's going to happen in this campaign, in this election. So what can we do? How can we help mitigate this stress? How can we engage in social justice that's going to make a difference and help them? Next slide, please. So we have to be conscious of debates versus dialogues. If we are going to tackle any of these issues as chaplains, any single one of them, we have to go into it understanding that there is a very big difference between what a debate is and what a dialogue is. And we want you to have dialogue, not get into debates. A debate assumes that there's one right answer. A dialogue does not. There's many different pieces and people can have various opinions. A debate is combative. A dialogue is collaborative. A debate is about winning. A dialogue is about learning. We want to listen to find flaws and make counter arguments. We want to listen in a dialogue to understand and find meaning. We want to critique the other side's position in a debate, right? In a dialogue, we want to reveal assumptions for reevaluation. A debate wants to defend one's views. A dialogue wants to admit that maybe other people's views can improve their own. And in a debate, you want to search for flaws. In a dialogue, you want to look for the strengths. You want to have a strengths-based perspective. And in a debate, we want to seek a conclusion or vote that confirms your position. But in a dialogue, we want to discover new opinions, right? We're not seeking closure. We're not going to find the answer to any of these problems, but we can have a dialogue about it. Next slide. So spiritual care providers must also create a brave space to promote equity and inclusion. You can go to the next one, Peter. So a few years ago, they started doing these safe spaces in schools and colleges. It was very big even at the colleges that I teach. And we would have signs and they would say, this is a safe space. So if you were feeling upset about an issue going on in society or even on campus, you could go and you could sit. Maybe there would be somebody that you could call. That kind of thinking has shifted. Now we're moving from a safe space to a brave space. And this graphic really shows the difference. We want people to always feel safe when they're around a chaplain or a spiritual care provider, but we also want them to be able to be brave enough to talk to us about the hot button issues and be confident that the way that we are going to react to them is fair and equitable, okay? It's controversy with civility, distinguish between people and ideas, take care of yourself, own your intentions and your impact, and again, controversy with civility. Safe space is more about that physical space, right? The physical, actual dynamics of a room where you are, that you should be able to express yourself. We want as chaplains to have a brave space. We want to reframe that. Next slide, please. Spiritual care providers must practice self-care in order to be advocates for equity and inclusion. We cannot pour from an empty cup. And this is something that we learn in CPE, that we learn in social work school. You can go to the next slide, Peter. In order for us to be able to cope with all this unrest that is happening, we need to really focus on self-care. This is one of the self-care wheels that I particularly like myself. It was in a book, Transforming the Pain, a workbook on vicarious traumatization. And there's 6 elements to it: psychological, emotional, spiritual, personal, professional, and physical. You can go to the next slide. It's the Olga Phoenix self-care wheel. And the way that you have to kind of figure out how your self-care is or where it's going is you need to assess. So you have to identify what you need to do for self-care. You're going to have to plan your transformation, how you're going to end up planning how you are going to sustain it. And then you have to implement it. A plan has no value unless it's acted upon. So you have to make time and schedule ways to help yourself with self-care. You can go to the next slide. So this is the emotional domain, right? You want to make sure that you're performing affirmations, crying, social justice engagement, laugh, say I love you, find a hobby, spend time with people you love. You have to feed your soul in the emotional domain. Next slide. In the physical domain, eat healthy, get out and walk, exercise. Maybe you need a chiropractor, an acupuncturist, take some baths. Whatever you do that's going to help your body be physically well and your mind at the same time is going to be beneficial to you. And turn off your cell phones. All of us are like this constantly with the phones, constantly. We need to take a break. Next. The psychological domain. Many of us do not take care of ourselves mentally. And as we're going through these COVID times and going through some of these issues with race and inequality, we need to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves mentally. Mindfulness, therapy, support, join a support group, connect with another clergy person in your denomination or another to give yourself that support. We need that psychological strength. Next slide. Spiritual domain. Self-reflection, spend time in nature, meditation, prayer, volunteer for a cause that's close to your heart, foster self-forgiveness. Next slide. Personal, learn who you are, explore what you want out of life. When I first met my husband, he had a very good saying for me, and I was 18 when I met him. And he said to me, the person that you are at 18 is not going to be the person that you are at 25. And that is consistently true, but I did not believe him at that age. We do not want the same things now that we did when we were 18, 25, 35, 40. We have to consistently reevaluate what makes us happy. Make a vision board, foster friendships, learn to relax. We cannot help anybody unless we ourselves are right, mind, body, and spirit. Next slide, please. So this is a worksheet that you can download about your spiritual care plan. And I've broken it down into mind, body, emotion, spirit, work, and personal. And it's something to keep you honest. You know, even if you just keep it on your desk and jot something down, what is your current practice? What is your new practice? We need to have a plan. And it's my hope that each of you will try to implement some form of self-care or enhance what you're already doing after this process. Next slide, please. So now I'd like to inform you all that you have met a unicorn. I know they're very rare, so you have to consider yourselves very, very lucky that I was able to be your unicorn today. And I'll tell you why. 1 in 7 people in the United States have met a blind person. And although I'm looking at you now and it looks like I'm looking in the screen, I can't see what any one of you look like. I can't see what your race is, your ethnicity is. I have no idea what your backgrounds are, if your houses are messy, clean. I can't see any of it. I have one small pocket of vision in my right eye, and that's all I can see if I get my face right up to the screen. I have a screen reader that's on my computer now that is giving me audio cues that you can't hear, but I can. And that's how I'm able to work the PowerPoint and, you know, be able to be with you today. I want to share with you my personal testimony about being a disabled chaplain, because it has been very, very difficult. And no matter how much training I've received as a social worker and in CPE, nothing has prepared me for some of the people that I have met and some of the prejudice that I have experienced just based on my own disability. So I had breast cancer. And for much of my 20s, I bounced in and out of remission. You can go to the next slide, Peter, that's fine. And when I was 28 years old, the doctors told me that my cancer had progressed so much that if I did not take this therapeutic drug within my chemotherapy, that I was going to die. And they said it had a 2% chance of impacting my optic nerve. So my husband and I discussed it, and we went with the drug. And what ended up happening is about a year later, I lost my color vision. I couldn't see anything. And then I started tripping over curbs and falling over things. And finally, I was working as a school social worker in a school here on Staten Island. I went to work one day and I had a monstrous headache. And I called my husband and asked him to pick me up from school, and he did. And I went home and took a nap, and was completely blind. And what had happened was my optic nerve that's attached to my brain had swelled so much, and there had been a breakage of the blood vessels that I couldn't see at all. And it took months of steroids for my eye to get down to the point that I have some vision now. So, you know, society, from going from a sighted woman to a blind woman, really had a lot of questions about my ability to do almost anything. They didn't think that a blind woman could be married. I'd had people that would stop me on the street and, you know, they thought my husband was my caretaker, or they thought he was a saint for staying with me, you know, through our marriage. People believed I needed to be fixed. They would come to me, perfect strangers on the street, and ask to pray over me and say, please God, you know, fix her, let her be able to see again. I didn't need to be fixed. I needed to understand the path that God had put into my life, accept it, and see where I could grow from it. There's nothing broken with me. I'm not a broken person. I just don't see the same way that other people see. And in many ways, when I came to accept my disability and I did those self-reflections and I took the time to self-care and I took the time to educate myself, I realized that what God had given me was not a curse, it was a blessing. Because he opened my eyes, and I see clearer to you now than I have ever seen before in my life. And I say that as a blind woman. I have had struggles accessing many different things, including attending my CPE classes. It's very, very difficult when you go into a fully sighted world, you know, for you to be able to access documents and to be able to have full accessibility on the internet. It's something that I struggle with. The other thing that has been very difficult for myself is, despite all the education, all the credentials, everything that I have, I am consistently underemployed. People do not want to hire me because I am blind and because I have a guide dog by my side. They feel that I am a liability. They are afraid. They don't know the questions to ask. And it is exhausting, physically exhausting, to have to constantly promote yourself and say, you know, hey, I am capable. I've had the training. I know what to do. I'm a good chaplain. It's really, really difficult. Those I chaplain to, many times I will go and meet a family and they will instantly say, you can't pray for me. I need to pray for you, you know, because you're blind. You can't be here and help me in this moment of crisis. It takes a lot of centering of my mind, my body. I call on the Holy Spirit to guide me and give me the strength to let these people know that I am there for them. And sometimes, in very rare cases, I will tell you it does not work. And then we have an expression that we learned in CPE where it's going to the south side of the kingdom. And you have to let people know that, hey, you called me. I'm here for you. I want to do my best, but they're not going to undervalue me as a chaplain. So sometimes you have to assert yourself, and you do it professionally and nicely, but sometimes you got to reach real deep. And I feel like hearing before Miss Rochelle speaking, I think that she'll feel me on this. I think that she's got me on this. But I have to work harder to assert myself and my capabilities as a chaplain with everybody that I encounter, the people that I'm chaplaining to, and also the nursing staff, the doctors, hospitals, nursing homes. I struggle every single day, even with buildings, transportation, accessibility. But we walk by faith and not by sight. I live and breathe that every day. And I hope that if you ever encounter a chaplain that has a disability, that you will take their lives in totality into account and not just see them face value as a blind person or somebody in a wheelchair. Next slide, please. To create inclusion, chaplains must do the following, and we're going to wrap this up now. Next slide. This is what I want you to do as your checklist. This is your takeaway. You're going to create that brave space and share. You're going to invite all people, race, color, creed, ethnicity, disability, everybody gets to participate. You're going to be open and respectful in your communication. You're going to include other perspectives. You're going to be conscious of others and what accommodations that they may need. You're going to listen to what others have to say before expressing your viewpoint. Ask probing questions. If you don't know, there's no harm in asking. Do it tactfully. We've all been trained to do that, and we shouldn't be afraid to. Choose topics where everyone is included. Volunteer to share your information. And embrace learning about each other. We learn from those we chaplain to, and we need to be vulnerable while being safe. It's not easy sometimes to talk about ourselves in chaplaincy. Sometimes it may not even be a safe thing to do, but in certain instances, I believe that it is necessary. And we do have to open ourselves up to being vulnerable. Next slide, please. I want to leave you with this kind of half a speech, half a devotional, I guess you would say, from this woman, Elandria Williams, here on Staten Island, and it's called We Are Worthy. We are worthy not because of what we produce, but because of who we are. We are divine bodies of light and darkness. You are not worthy because of what you offer, not because of what is in your mind, not for the support you give others, not for what you give at all. We are worthy and whole just because in this great turning, in this great pandemic, in this radical readjustment and alignment, we are not disposable. We are needed. We are the very people that have withstood everything that have been thrown at us as a people. And as Maya Angelou would say, still I rise. We arise from pain. We rise from grief. We arise from the limits people place on us and the limits we place on ourselves. We rise to be the children and the ancestors. We rise to be our true selves in the relationship to our families and communities, recognizing our liberating and our whole selves, honoring them and the others as we strive for abundant communities, abundant lives, abundant relationships, and abundant values and cultural manifestations. We are worthiness personified. I, you, and we are worthy and deserve a life where we are not always fighting for our existence. Imagine what we could create if we were not always in this struggle. Imagine what we could envision if we could just be to let go and go there. So tired and always having to resist, to fight, demanding, pushing, to everyone that has this courage, the power, the ability to co-create what we want and we need while rooting in what we can't lose and who we are. You are the visionary. You are the hope. You are the ancestors' dreams. Now you might not ever end up on some list somewhere, but you are on a list in someone's heart and mind. And if it is how you move in the world so people can see you by example, you are the embodiment of what we need. Thanks to all that are the embodiment not of productivity, but the embodiment of radical love, care, and sanctuary. It is time, embodiment, living one's values out loud. Let me every day live my values out loud. Let us every day live our values out loud, embodying our values, not in the productivity quotient, beyond productivity, past productivity, true embodiment, life. Each of you has that embodiment. Each of you has that ability. And I truly hope that what you have learned here today helps you move forward in these difficult times to get a better understanding of both equity and inclusion. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Holly, and just so grateful for you for helping us wade into these waters of equity and inclusion in a world and a society, and so often our workplaces where we encounter intolerance and exclusion and try to navigate these waters. So at this time, I'd like to invite questions.
Holly, no question. I just want to say thank you. I mean, you hit every avenue of my life anyways, and of things that's going on in the world. Powerful. absolutely powerful. I'd like you to come at our church, and you're just powerful. I just blessed me so much. What a blessing. You work for
Thank
me.
you.
And I'm sure others feel you were truly a blessing. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that.
Great. So other questions? Oh, well, Charlie, you got your hand up. Go for it. Charlie, you need to unmute. You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah,
There you go.
Holly, Charlie Grimm here. If some of you were watching my screen, you saw me pick up the computer and walk because I took it into Joan. Joan is in the other room. I'm not going to put the camera on Joan because she wouldn't want to be seen. She's not dressed to be seen with other people. I mean, she's dressed, but
I am in a robe
you can hear her.
in our family room.
Can you hear her?
I
Yeah.
can hear. Hi, Joan.
Okay.
Hi.
Holly,
This,
Yeah.
this remote goes everywhere in our house. It walks with Buzz round and round and round and round. You never know.
But the reason I did that is because many of the chaplains, my friends, my colleagues, know that Joan has attended conference with me because Joan suffers from diabetic retinopathy, and she has had a gradual loss of her sight, and it's getting worse. And so I wanted to hear you in terms of your struggle because, you know, like with your husband who's down there with the kids and he has tasks that he has to do that are different because of your family situations. The same is true with us. And it's given us insight, as you have talked about, what God does and how through his spirit we can get through these things. But I wanted Joan to hear you, and maybe you could just have a word with her for a minute.
Oh, Joan, you know, it's so funny, Charlie, that your wife's name is Joan. My grandparents were Charlie and Joan. So
Oh, really?
I'm feeling a little transference here myself now. So it's, you know, Joan, I feel you with the diabetic retinopathy. I mean, it's been a long journey for me with my eyesight. My job currently in Staten Island is I work as the borough coordinator for vision services for the blind and visually impaired. But if you ever need any resources for low vision, whether it be, you know, services or training, or even, you know, with yourselves with the church council, if you're ever questioning how to make a PowerPoint more accessible, something like that, I'm happy to help. But Joan, I hope you're feeling well.
It's this restraint from going out that's affecting everybody now. And of course, now we have another threat to interfere and not do this what we did for years and years. And, you know, it's been a long time. I was teaching actively in the same school that Buzz was working until I retired in '96. And in '98, of course, all the vision started dumping. So it's changed. But our boys are all grown up, our boys, and the school boys. So I think I feel more shut off from the activity.
It's very isolating.
Well, once you can't drive, you've added another whole element to your activity. So,
Yes.
but we can do it alone together.
Absolutely. And if you're feeling lonely for children, as I said, I have 2 downstairs. I'm happy to ship one to you. If you'd like one, even temporarily.
Well, I think in all of this, and as I heard, I think it was Evelyn, you know, saying how inspiring your message is to us. It's like a sermonette in a way. It's a presentation, but we're all depressed. I mean, I think we have to admit it. You don't want to think about it, but it kind of sneaks up on us like a fog, you know, a little bit, and then it gets a lot, and we don't want to kind of admit that this is just so depressing.
It's limiting.
And limiting, you know.
Another barrier, a little harder, especially I find I worry about sons who worry about me. which was the switch around now. Now they're worried about mom. Mom can't see and mom's getting older and, shall I stop and worry in the midst of my active point? You don't want that either. So it's another whole facet to your
Well,
meaning.
I'm happy to connect with you even after Charlie or Peter. You
Yes.
can give Charlie my
Yeah.
number, and I'd be happy to talk to you, Joan.
Oh,
Right.
that'd be fun.
Yeah, well, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Peter.
Keep on keeping on.
Great.
Something I know very well used to say all the time.
Good advice.
Yes, it is sometimes.
Thanks.
I'm glad you're with us, Joan, and I'd like to now turn to Queen Mother Moses, who has a question.
Give thanks for the opportunity. Oh, this was well worth it. All I have to say in this era of COVID, pandemic confusion, Halibana, in this 2020, you do have a clear vision for the third eye to be open personally and in institutions with solutions to equity and inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Queen Mother. I appreciate that.
It's great. So other questions now. Okay, Gary, I see your hand.
As a person who has vision problems and I'm losing my vision, one of the things that I encounter, and I encounter it frequently in churches, is well-meaning people who decide for me what I'm capable of doing and what I'm not capable of doing, rather than leaving that decision to me. And I'm wondering if you encounter that and if that's common for people with
Yes.
disabilities.
Yes, it is. Unfortunately, disability theology in general and accessibility for houses of worship is something that the research is really lacking. Personally, I can tell you the very first time I took my daughters into a Catholic church, and I was born and raised Catholic. I don't identify as Catholic anymore. I'm currently looking for a church home, I guess, so to speak. I was met at the door by the priest who told me that my children and my guide dog had to stay in the back of the church because I was a distraction and people were uncomfortable. So I said to the priest, interesting, Father, because if Jesus was here, I would be moved right to the front, not to the back where nobody had to see me. And he did not know what to say, but I am consistently grabbed, pulled. I have people that feel like they have to pull open my hand during services if we're going to give the sign of peace or to receive communion. It is very disturbing to me. And what I try to do about it is I really try to educate parishioners, and I try to educate the clergy. The problem that I encounter is that a lot of clergy, in particular in the Catholic faith, they do not seem that they are willing to sit down and have a conversation of what makes it accessible for somebody like myself, or how to kind of teach the etiquette, the basic etiquette that people need to know when dealing with a visually impaired person. My first idea would be to go to the person in charge and see if you could have that conversation, but it has been something that I have consistently dealt with. And, my feelings with the church really go beyond that. As somebody that was born a cradle Catholic, it really goes to how Catholics now look at women in chaplaincy. I feel like I have a voice, and I want that voice to be heard, and I have daughters, and I want my daughters' voices to be heard. And in order to do that, I have to find some place that wants to hear me. And I'm hoping that as I kind of traverse this new territory, that I'll be able to teach people how to be equitable and inclusive, with myself being a member of a congregation, but also to be appreciated for who I am and what I bring.
Great. Other questions? Yeah, I see Grover. Grover, you need to unmute. You need to unmute yourself. Grover, you need to unmute. Grover, you need to unmute yourself.
Peter, Peter, if you're the admin, you can unmute him if you want on the side panel. Click on participants.
Yeah, you can unmute him, Peter.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you can unmute him.
Just a minute. Let me find him.
Yeah.
Well, Holly, while we're waiting on Grover, there's
Yeah.
something you said that I'm gonna carry with me. When you said, I don't need the Lord to heal me. I need him to help me walk through the path he's laid before me. That is powerful. I'm gonna hold on to that. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Let me close my mouth here.
I'd also like to say something. This is Reverend Kim Osorio, and I'm the VP of Operations with New York State Chaplain Task Force. Holly, I want to applaud you. What a phenomenal, I mean, I was literally holding back tears as you were speaking because I could relate to so many things that you were saying. But one thing in particular that you said was our lens sometimes gets stuck. And I was disabled, still am legally disabled, but for 20 something years. And it wasn't until I accepted the fact that I was just differently able. This is the way God chose me to be, so that I could relate and be able to journey alongside so many people that that my vision was open.
Yes.
So I just want to thank you, and may you continue to go on and allow God to use you in the magnificent way that He is using you. I am so appreciative.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you.
Okay. Now, Grover, I'm going to try to unmute you.
Yeah.
Um,
He's labeled under owner, Peter, if that helps.
yeah, I see that. I'm just, oh dear. I keep trying to click on it, but Grover, can you unmute yourself? I still can't figure out how to do that.
Grover, if you're using a computer, if you just hold down your space bar, that will unmute you temporarily. Just hold it down while you're speaking. If you're using if you have a
Can you
keyboard.
hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. You got it.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Holly, I just want to, I'm Grover T. Ready. I just wanted, first of all, to thank you for speaking. The first thing I want to comment on is your personal courage, because it takes a lot of courage to be as effective as you are and to work where you are working. And I think it's a wonderful thing. But what I sense in your presentation was spirituality that runs through what you were saying. And for us as chaplains, I just thought it was profoundly provocative and important and inspirational just to listen to hear you this morning and hear you. So I just wanted to thank you for what you said and all that you did. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
very much, Grover. I appreciate that.
Great. Thank you. Other questions? So I'll try.
Holly?
So many of us work in these very strict institutional spaces that are not immune from politically charged conversation. For people who work among those who are incarcerated, I mean, certainly questions around Black Lives Matters and incarceration and so on weigh heavy in these spaces. And it can sometimes feel almost unsafe to talk about this, or even not permitted. But I'm just curious what advice you'd have about, venturing these conversations in these highly structured, sometimes conflicted spaces in which chaplains work.
You know, I think as chaplains, you know your audience better than anybody else. So when you are in whatever facility or, you know, prison that you might be working in, you have a relationship with the people that we chaplain to, whether you're running individual sessions, group sessions. So you really have to know, based on that audience, how you're going to give this segue to kind of approach it with the people that you are ministering to. So would I recommend going in and having a group session and say, hey, you know, we're all going to sit down today and talk about how Black Lives Matter is affecting, you know, how you are viewing the deaths of, you know, George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, or how, you know, the racial unrest is impacting how you feel about the world? Probably not, because it may be too much for one person to handle, even with a co-facilitator. I would always consider doing individual check-ins first, you know, with your clients. And if you're worried about the bureaucracy of what you're dealing with as far as where you work, I would also do individual sessions or mini check-ins with whoever your superior is. You know, you have to see where the superior lies with what you are going to do or what you're going to venture into talking about. You don't have to be directly on the same page with them all the time. You're going to have your views, they're going to have their views. But if you can have that dialogue, not the debate, the dialogue, and come to a consensus that then you can then bring to your constituents or those you minister to in a safe way, I think that is the most effective course of action, you know, to kind of bypass some of these issues while still addressing them.
Great, thank you. I see Reverend Massey Harris now has a question. Rochelle?
To Holly, I loved your segment. Thank you. It was registering to me.
The benefits are bigger, but the
Can you hear me? Because I hear something else.
Products, dental benefits, and $0 copays for cheap generic drugs.
Somebody needs to mute. Okay.
$0 premium. And all from a local company with one of the most.
Can you hear me?
Somebody needs to mute.
All today. Speak with your Medicare advisor.
This is topic about Black Lives Matter. There's still some. Is it TV or something?
And we can't thank you enough. To all of our pets,
you may need to mute everybody, and then Reverend Rochelle can, you know, there you go.
Okay. We were talking about the Black Lives Matter situation. It's interesting. I just got finished writing a book that is entitled Preaching Through the Storm of Rejection. And it deals with me as a chaplain being female, Black, and full figured, because they saw that as a disability. I believe I'm blessed, and yes, so through that book, and it's interesting because I just talk about the whole situation, and just so you guys know, I got permission from docs to actually publish it, because they can sue you, but they allowed me to publish this book. And so it's interesting that in my experience, and it came from when I was at a max prison, and being the first female Black a chaplain there to an all-male facility, I experienced a lot of things. And so the way I've expressed it has been through, God has blessed me to publish the book. And hopefully it's going to be inspirational to other people that are just faced with rejection based on who God made you. You know what I'm saying? Mind you, I was sent there, and I already knew I was sent there to be a blessing, but that's what they were rejecting based on just my physical, who I was, and my gender. And so that's how I have dealt with it. So now I just got to pray for a publisher, but the book is written finally, you know, and I have gotten permission from docs. Those conversations do come up when I interface with inmates, and they have real issues with the whole thing. And I think as a spiritual person or a Christian, I keep just reframing and refocusing, because we can't really focus in on just the Black stuff. See, and that's what I try to do. I keep trying to, God said that we're supposed to love our neighbors.
Yes.
First, love him, as likewise our neighbors. And so what I try to reframe, I have the conversation, and I usually have it by myself. And I let them express things, and they're right. But then I try to get them to refocus that it's just not about us. It is about inclusion. Now, we might keep being left out, but I really try to push them back to scripture that really God created all of us, and he loves all of us the same. And if we stay focused on that does not mean that the injustice and things that are going on is not right. But the reason why I say that is because I don't want them then to respond back negatively. You get what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And you know, your question is very interesting coming after Peter's question, because as a Black woman going in and chaplaining to, say, Black inmates, your response would be received differently than a white male or a white woman, because it's a different lens, right? It's a different perspective. And they may feel, and you will encounter people that feel more connected with the way you view the world simply because of your skin tone. You know, and that's something I think that we need to be aware of. It's the same conversation, but who facilitates it is going to have a different reaction. And as long as you're aware of that, as long as you're cognizant of it, you should be able to mitigate any responses that may be unforeseen, you know, because it's a difficult subject to talk about. And I wish you luck on your book, because you're your own type of unicorn.
Amen.
Amen. I think you're muted, Peter.
You have to unmute, Peter.
Bishop Dewberry and then Chaplain Agatha.
Okay, yes, I'm Bishop Ronald Dewberry. I've been a Protestant chaplain in Docks for 14 years, pastor 40 years, still pastor, and do a lot of different things in my community. My whole experience at Docks has been in maximum security facilities, Elmira, 5 Points, and currently Auburn. And I just want to go back to the topic of dealing with whether it's racially or politically charged discussions with inmates. And I would just underscore, and I think that we all agree with this, that you have to be very, very careful about having those conversations with inmates, although they are, some are aware, and obviously they can be, because they have outside contact, they have tablets, those in honor housing, they watch the news and things of that nature. But because prisons are typically highly charged environments, that, you know, when I say that highly charged, I'm saying that due to the level of violence that we all know, if you work in a prison, that takes place, a lot of the violence, you know, that takes place is not just inmate on inmate, but inmate on staff. And given the fact that, you know, the last demographics I recall, that the diversity group said 50% are African American, 36% are Latino, and the rest are other, that you have to be, you know, again, you have to be, you know, very, very careful about having those kinds of conversations. There may be some that you can selectively, you know, and individually or privately have, you know, modest discussions like that. But because you're dealing with a lot of, in many cases, young men and women, you know, who if they haven't come from a violent background are engaged, or for the most part, are still affiliated in a degree of violence that, again, it could be counterproductive, and of course you can end up being the fall person for instigating, unrest, because a lot of ways, the only people that they can, if they're not mature enough to handle the conversation, the only people that they can, ventilate their frustration or their angst against what they see going on in the world is against each other, mm-hmm. and or against staff. A lot of times it's with security. And I'm not saying that, that there aren't, instigators, that are on the staff side of it with security and things like that. All that does is just feed into the frustration that a lot of the young men and women have, especially those in maximum security places that are doing long bids. And a lot of the, a lot of more recent changes have happened in corrections where a lot of inmates now, when they do commit these acts of violence, either against staff or each other, they don't do a lot of shoe time anymore. It used to be the idea of going to the shoe would be somewhat of a deterrent, because it's isolation, from programming, isolation from whoever your peers are, 1 hour of rec and or other, personal things that you have to attend to. The rest of the time you're in a special housing. But that has changed. And so that it's become less and less a deterrent. And of course, if you talk to any of the NSCOBA representatives, they'll tell you how the level of violence has increased. And this is just my own personal experience, and I'll end on this note. I've seen, been in the midst of semi-riots in prison. I've seen officers get hit flesh in the face or stomped in the ground, by a group of inmates. I'm not saying that there aren't bad officers, but I'm saying though that, that prisons oftentimes lend themselves to violence because that's the only way that many of the inmates feel that they can express their frustration. And so, as a chaplain, what I do when I talk to my guys, and Protestants are usually the largest groups in our facilities, is that I try to flip it to how they can rechannel their energy in ways in a much more positive way, when they get out. How can you help to change the trajectory of what you see and hear about, that may have been, that you may have been one time a part of, but now, you've matured some, you've seen, the recycling of this kind of thing, the perpetuation of it coming into the prison year after year. I mean, it's almost like, you're at ground zero year after year because, you're constantly being, there are new people that are coming in and who are trying to establish themselves in the prison, and the older people, either they're just doing longer bids, and they probably won't get out, or they're trying to, they've been in prison long enough that that they want to go home. They want to be able to transition from being at a max to a medium, and hopefully from a medium to home. So, just wanted to add that comment to it, for the sake of those chaplains that are in the facilities. Be very, very careful about how you navigate those conversations, because at the end of the day, you're probably going to be held liable for it.
Okay, Holly, response.
And to be honest, I have never worked in a prison setting. I can tell you that New York Theological Seminary, where I do my schooling, I'm in the second year of my DMin, they have a program up at Sing Sing, where they are trying to help our inmates get their MDivs, or certificates towards that degree. I have visited. It was a very uncomfortable experience for me. And I will say the reason being is because of the lack of vision. I am very cognizant of my safety at all times, whether I'm out on the street in front of my house or, you know, visiting a client in any facility, but the smells, the sounds, the tactile sense of everything being so cold, that's how I read the world. And that was very eye-opening for me. I have worked in Staten Island at a residential drug treatment facility with youth and adult men that are sent there or whatever for a period of time based on, you know, their criminal cases, usually having to do with drugs. And that's their alternative to incarceration. And that was a different experience, but I was cited at the time. One of the things that I will say in both experiences is I think, yes, you have to be very cognizant and careful, as you said, but I don't think we can also negate or forget about the people that are at risk. You're saying, you know, the security, the police officers that are there, or the prison guards that are there. If there is a way to safely separate them and have a conversation with them about these issues as well, that may have trickle-down effects. And may, you know, ease some of the stress that they're having to make them do their job better, and also to let them know that you are a brave space and a safe space for them as a chaplain. But I will defer to you as far as, you know, your experience with actually being in the prison system based on what you've seen. But I do think that's something to consider.
Okay, we have one more question, and then we'll have to conclude. But Chaplain Agatha?
Yes. Hi, greetings, everyone. Thank you, Reverend Miranda and Holly, for such an awesome presentation, because it falls deep into my spirit and my heart. I am a disabled Army veteran, over 25 disabilities. If you see me, you would think there's nothing wrong with me, but all my disabilities are internal: heart pacemaker, PTSD, TBI, dislocated discs, 5 in the neck, 5 in the back, so many fibromyalgias. But if you see me, I will look perfectly normal to you. My question to Reverend Miranda and also Holly is that I am also a dance minister. And each day it's a difficult task with your disabilities, to still do the honorable work of the kingdom. I do have a caregiver. My question to you both is, how do you educate your leaders? Because in order for me to perform my tasks, whether my workload, I am also going to school for my master's in human rights, I have to be doubly aggressive with my physical body and my daily tasks. And being a woman who was in the military, some leaders may not see my ambition, right? Or the labor of the daily task because of my disabilities. They may view it as being aggressive, or not understanding that there's a passion and ambition because you're disabled to still do the works of the kingdom. I've had the same example as Holly, that let's pray for healing. But I also learned as a chaplain that healing is a process, right? So there is a process that I must go through every day when I go through anxieties, or being able to admit as a veteran that I have disabilities. So I've been passed over for pastoral positions, or been told by other places I am a prophet, but within my own house, I am not considered a leader because of my disabilities. So I've moved around, been in one place of service for 10 years, another 2 or 3, because of the not understanding that it's not aggressive, or it may be a cultural thing because I am a woman who serves, that I cannot be in a position because I still have to go through healing. I've been a Christian for 15 years and I've cried out to God. Man tells me I need to heal. These things you need to remove from me. But like you said, Holly, it is not a curse. It's a blessing because I have to be extremely more aggressive for the things of the kingdom. I can feed homeless. I can go to the prisons. I can do all things that God has called us to do to be a service. But how do I educate those leaders that don't see me as a tool, but I still need to go through healing? Because one of the pastors told me, hurt people hurt other people. So therefore, we can't have you pastor, you know, and it has led me to feel rejected in the kingdom, but I still persevere in the kingdom because I know my identity. So I want to be able to network with people who understand you may have a disability, but you're not broken. How do you educate those leaders that still feel that you need to be fully healed to do the work of a leader in the kingdom when you can still do work outside within the community?
Okay. Holly, could you respond?
First, I just want to say, Chaplain Agatha, thank you for sharing that with me. I'm glad that you feel that here is your brave space and that you're able to say that. And I can hear the tearfulness in your voice, even though I can't see that. And it resonates with me deeply. You know, sometimes, as I mentioned during the presentation, you know, it is difficult to educate these leaders. I was very fortunate even coming across Reverend Miranda in CPE as a supervisor, and he saw something in me and said, you know what, this maybe is something different. We have somebody with a disability. And he and I have had many conversations about ways to make the task force more accessible for people and more inclusive for disabled chaplains. He is a leader, you know, with disability theology and disability chaplaincy. It's rare. He's a unicorn too, by the way. It's very rare to find these people. He has a horn on top of his head somewhere. A good one. But, you know, it's very, very hard. That being said, if you keep butting your head against the wall with a church leader, then, sister, hear me when I tell you, you need to go south side of the kingdom. And what I mean by that is there is something called the Americans with Disabilities Act that protects us and that allows us to have equality and equity in the workplace. And if you feel that your disability is what's being led to you being held back from these positions, then you have a case. And as somebody that's, you know, going to school for human rights, there are a lot of different organizations in New York City and New York State that would be willing to help you. You don't always want to have to be so aggressive. I started out when I lost my eyesight, I felt like I was fighting with everybody. Everybody that I met on the street, I felt like I was having an argument with. And you know what happened? My blood pressure went up. I got exhausted. I was tired, you know, and I had to really try to self-care and recenter myself. And even when I go see my clients now, whether it's a nursing home or whatever, I mentioned to you in the elevator, I got to get like focused. I have to be in the moment. I have to take that God's grace, the Holy Spirit, calm me, Lord. Let me get ready for this and try to take it to a more polite level if you can at first. But that doesn't mean that you don't have to sometimes reach out to other things. I wish that there was some type of organization or a governing body for chaplains like ourselves, that if you had a disability, that we had people to advocate for us and educate for us. But the fact that even being here today and being invited to speak, you're educating people. We're starting the conversation, you know, Chaplain Agatha, and I think that that's important, and it's up to you to continue it where you are. But I'll make the same invitation that I made to Charlie and Joan. I'd love to talk to you. You know, I'd love to. I have not met another disabled chaplain in any capacity. So for me, that would be a great benefit to me as well. So I would love to connect outside of this as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we're going to conclude here. Thank you, Holly, so much for this great presentation and for the conversation which ensued. And as we said, we have recorded these and we are going to send the PowerPoints out. But we are going to conclude for now and let people have their lunch. For docs, people associated with docs, we will come back at 12:45 to meet for an hour with officials from Docs. You should have a separate Zoom link from this one that you received. If you did not get that, please contact me by email right away, pcook@nyscoc.org, and we'll get that link to you. At 2 o'clock, we will come back sharp to have the presentation from Dr. Evans. You really don't want to miss this. He's just a brilliant theological mind who I think I have relied on so much for previous conferences which we've held, and he's always my go-to person to do great theological reflection. So we'll do that, and then right at our conclusion at 4, we will have the Protestant Association chaplain meeting, and really urge you to come to that as well. So thanks everybody, and we will see Docs chaplains at Docs employees at 12:45, and everybody together again at 2. Thanks.
Peter, we're gonna have PEF too at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, we will. We will have a representative from PEF during the association meeting, which is after the conference. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.